But you can say it better than me, right? Say it.
Lakweshia?
Yes. It's that, wow, I can't get it out. You ready? Are we in the box?
Patrick Ewing. J.R. Ewing.
Are we officially in the box? Do we need to make sure? Go ahead, Andy. You start. What's today?
I don't know what the... Oh, wait.
Oh,
August
yes.
August 31st. It's Wednesday.
Here on Archway on
Weird.
Glass Street, podcast number 9. Feels like a lucky number. We have a
31st?
guest today.
30th or 31st?
It's the 31st.
I think we're 31st.
Okay, let's roll with Andy. Introduce our guest.
All right,
please.
so we have a guest today, Lakweshia Ewing.
Yes, sir.
And I just met her. Michelle has invited her to the podcast, so tell us a little bit about you.
So I'm a local entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur. Own a tech company called Biz Boom Apps. Also, a real estate investment, homesfor10k.com. I am a recovering educator. I worked in the public school system for about 12 years. 8 of those years at the central office, one of the youngest directors in Hamilton County's history. And I am a youth pastor. So that's kind of my little
man.
Vita.
I brought
So
my
you think
game
she's
today.
busy?
I brought my game today.
Right.
Our guest star. And by the way, we have a corporate sponsor today. Let me go ahead and announce our corporate sponsor. Sunnyside Cup on Broad Street gave me this free cup of coffee. And so I told her she was my first corporate sponsor.
Did you say why she was giving you the coffee?
I told her, I said, I'm going to my podcast and I've got a really important lady coming there and I'm really nervous, and I wore my golf vest and I dressed up and I put a little makeup on because we're always in the box. And I said, and she goes, Michelle, for good luck, I'm going to give you this coffee for free. I said, you're my first corporate sponsor.
All right.
And I was like, I will take that cup of coffee, and I will mention Sunnyside Cup on Broad Street. This young lady, she serves coffee from 7 a.m. until 1 p.m. every day on Broad Street. She is on the right side of the street to serve breakfast and coffee. The Crystal, one of the first Crystals, I think it was close to the first Crystal on Broad Street or anywhere on Broad Street, paid over $1 million to build a building across the street because they had statistics that showed no one would stop for breakfast if they had to cross the street. And the demographics from Tiftonia and from down there in Rising Fawn and all those places and nowhere have so much traffic leading to Broad Street that people, they increase their sales numbers by crossing the street like 1,000%.
Wow.
You know, it's funny. The first time you and I started working together, Michelle, 2008, I had started telling people an idea of having coffee trailers, drive-through coffee trailers of like good coffee, local roaster. And everyone's like, you're crazy. No one would ever pay for that. No one will ever do that.
No one would ever stop at a
No one
trailer
will
with a
stop.
window in it.
And I was like, yeah, I think you're wrong.
They
Like,
thought the same thing
drive-through.
about banks, dude.
Yeah.
It's better than the Roach Coach, where you can pick up, the lunches that park in the parking lots.
Yeah.
You see the little critters crawling around with the sandwiches.
But I think everybody's still in the wrong spot because, well, this is selfish, but coming down Corridor J, coming down 27, there's not a single place for me to get a good cup of coffee until I hit downtown. Soddy Daisy to Chattanooga, no good coffee.
I think that's an opportunity right there.
Business idea.
That's for anybody listening out there. We think we've got 3 listeners, right? We think
It might be up to 7.
we might be up to 7. And guess who's not here today? Carlos
Governor.
Hampton, the governor. He texted me that he's got, chief battalion issues out at the city that he's got to deal with this morning. So if he walks in, we're going to give him hell for serving our city and doing what he's being paid to do and supposed to do. That selfish government person. So I would I'm Michelle Peterson. I'm also a serial entrepreneur. If it's the first time listening, I have been pretty vocal about how I feel about marketplaces in general right now. I have said that if I could rebrand Trump, I would replace him and get someone who's a real entrepreneur who didn't start with $1 million in the bank, who is, like I coined the phrase, I'm an entrepreneur from scratch. The reality is that I would coin his phrase, make America great again. I'd say bring opportunity back to America so that we could bust up some of these organizations and these institutions that have all of the money, and then basically what ends up happening is people with the money end up pointing at the rest of us trying to figure things out without the money. And I've been very fortunate that I have made money, gone broke, made money, gone broke, made money, gone broke. I've had governors in place in my life, mainly my family and friends, that any time I really needed them to step up, they wrote me a check and said, here, pay us back when you can. And I was like, really? How much interest you want on that? And I always paid them interest. It didn't matter. But it wasn't like I was talking to the Sunnyside lady this morning about the fact that, I see all of these things happening and, kids, and we're over here at Archway trying to promote brand awareness, product placement in music videos and movies and things like that. So we've invited our guests. And I have to admit something. I am having a hard time with our guest's name. I have said her name 1,000 times in the last 24 hours. I have been very upfront and honest with her that her name is like when someone tries to ask me to say the word rural.
Did you practice on the way here?
I did.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking I've got it now. Lakweshia.
That's it.
Go.
It's the W that's throwing me off. And when I think of the word rural, my Appalachian tongue does, would you like to say the word rural?
I assume you're saying rural?
Yes.
It's just a hard name for me to say.
Yeah.
Rural.
I mean, it's just a hard name. So, Lakweshia, I will do everything I can to respect your honesty and your courageousness, because we were on Female Factor with Main Street Innovations, and I took to you, invited you to lunch, and lo and behold, it was your birthday the day we went.
That's right.
And I just would really like to hear some more thoughts on what we were talking about at the Female Factor. Donna Christian Lowe was so kind to bring us together. Shout out to Donna and Main Street Innovations for what seems to be an interminable conversation with a lot of people, which is, why are they not getting a leg up when they start something? There seems to be this almost sycophantic way that if somebody shows a little bit of, I've been very fortunate that my success in the home elevator business was not seen by anyone, or I have no doubt that a corporation or someone even locally would have taken their bigger bucks and put it up against my sweat equity, and they would have beat me every day.
And and that was certainly just a luck adventure, right? Like, you weren't actively trying to make sure they didn't see you. It just luckily.
Oh no, I was actively.
Yeah.
Let's be clear.
What did you?
That was called
how did
strategy.
You do that?
I basically never bragged about anything, and I drove for probably the first couple of years of my success, where I was building $1 million house over in North Chattanooga, and didn't tell anybody I was building that house. So people I would run into them, and they would talk about the house, like, "Oh my gosh, did you see that house going up?" And I wouldn't take ownership of it because I didn't want anybody to know that was me. Now the greatest thing is I don't really have to tell people who I am, because the people that bought that house and other friends of mine who have been so wonderful to me have figured out that I'm kind of coming out of the business closet now and giving people my personal strategy when it comes to, and it really just comes right out of the book of I don't know, there's this movie with Denzel Washington where he's a drug dealer and he gets all upset because the lady that he's dating is wearing a chinchilla coat. Oh,
American Gangster.
Yeah, and I feel like some people who are trying to be successful, because I'm very superstitious too. So if you brag about, I'm very superstitious right now. I think I'm gonna go broke tomorrow because I've started telling people about my successes. I was always raised, You don't talk about yourself and your successes.
For sure.
But I feel like
So in the marketplace, though, Michelle, you know, there is a place for that. Unfortunately, I think there's a greater demand for us as females, right? There's a greater demand for us to be like that. It's almost like know when to hold, know when to fold, you know, card playing strategies. So if I show you everything I have, you know, there's a 50-50 chance that you're going to trump me. But if I can hold my cards long enough and bluff you long enough, you're going to fold.
no doubt.
You're going to fold. It's as simple as that. I did the exact same thing. I was at the school system working at the school system my very last year. I built an entire business the year prior to me leaving. The same week that I resigned, I was featured in Edge magazine as having this tech company with 15, you know, employees, and everybody's looking around trying to figure out what in the world, like you're at the school system. We just found out last week you were leaving, and now you have this successful business. Well, I had to hold my cards. Locally, I couldn't do anything here. I had to go all the way back to my roots. I'm a Memphian, born and raised. I've been in Chattanooga, though, for about 12, 13 years. But I had to go back home, build a business, and then once it became successful, I started letting people in Chattanooga know that it existed because I had other things that I was doing here. So I had to hold my cards really, 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 really closely. And part of that was to build credibility in the city that I was living in.
There's no doubt. We touched on this with Donna Lowe, and I felt like it could have been the whole conversation, which you had two females on the stage, entrepreneurs who both said we had to leave Chattanooga to go make our money. And I recognized that very early on waiting tables in Chattanooga, that there was an institutional mindset in Chattanooga that they would give you a job but not opportunity. And they being just a systematic situation when it comes to law firms, insurance people, banks. You know, it's interesting, and I've been very candid with people, and I know that people are not, if the people get offended, then they aren't looking at the pond that I'm looking at. And the reality is these people that get offended are going to die on the vine if they don't begin to recognize that it is the middle-aged people right now who have started early and had a lot of success and failures, who are going to recognize that when you're in a room of 200 women, and I was recently at a law firm, a prominent 100-year-old law firm here in town, and I asked the people at that law firm to walk me up to the entrepreneurs there, to the business women in that room, and they could find one. And there were 200 people, and I said, don't introduce me to a woman that works for a nonprofit. Don't introduce me to a woman who is a banker, and don't introduce me to a woman who's in insurance.
How many minorities was in that number?
I think probably 4. But again, that has to do with the fact that these people that have been controlling this mechanism of opportunity in this country, this isn't just a Chattanooga issue.
Right.
This is a national issue where people who run businesses don't understand that the way that, and I don't want to go into, making hyperboles or basically go out and do the extremes, but this is the extreme when it comes to business. If you're these people that are whipping these other people's butts at the marketplace right now are doing it through global diversity, and they're bringing people in that aren't afraid and moving and making moves in their organizations through fear. They're making moves in their organizations through opportunity. It doesn't take a rocket science, even though I'm not a big fan of Google. Google has made me a millionaire. There's no doubt. And the reality is because I could learn the system of Google and understand that they had the most amount of fish. Yeah. I could throw any piece of bait into that pond at any given place, and I had opportunity.
Right? Yeah.
Simply because they knew they could take the yellow pages and digitize it. They could put the maps that were on the beginning of your yellow pages. They could put the directories. They could say that we're part of an organization that is going to begin to allow people to advertise, which is, again, the yellow pages. And they could establish without being broken up. They're a global yellow page. And the reality is, what does that say for Sunnyside, Cup on Broad Street, when she can't go up against that kind of fish unless she has 16,000 cars passing her. It's like I told her the last time I passed through, put some balloons up. People love balloons. It just conveys trust.
And a chalkboard.
And a chalkboard.
And a chalkboard.
Just tell people who you are. And that's really what we're doing over here, Lakweshia. So I'm just very blessed to have you. But I know nothing about institutional education. Can you tell us?
It's petrifying.
It is petrifying, and I like the fact that you coined it the way that it is. It's institutional education. We're going to talk about public school education and understanding that if you go all the way back post Reformation of this country, what schools were created to do. Schools were created to give you 3 classes of people. You go back, you read any history book, any educational policy or law class, it will tell you post Reconstruction. We had this organized institution that we're now going to educate. In America, we do it very interesting. I'll talk a little bit about what other countries and people on other continents are doing with education. But we kind of have this, I call it the timeshare model, where we educate everybody and we set a cap, really high, knowing that 50%, maybe more, probably won't hit it, but everybody's eligible. Right? So that's what they do with the timeshare. You go to those little timeshares, and we're going to set that cap real high, and we're going to have a sliding scale, and some people are going to be able to get a lower rate, but everybody will be able to get something. But it's going to tax you. It's going to cost you. And so public education, post-Reformation, gave you 3 classes of people. It gave you the upper management, it gave you middle management, and it gave you laborers. That's exactly, if you went through and looked at the history of public education, it will show you where people start. And that's where we started tracking kids. They got on a leadership or a collegiate path. Then you got a group of kids that got on more of the labor. So we had schools that were teaching masonry and carpentry. And there was nothing wrong with those things. But how did you make that decision in kindergarten, in first grade, that, Lakweshia is going to be a carpenter and Michelle is going to be, a corporate CEO? How do you make that decision? So that's when we see all of this legislation being passed as the years went on about equity and fair school policies and separate but equal and all that kind of stuff. And it was in the tone of what was happening outside of education, but education was the catalyst with Brown versus Board education and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, I heard recently or read, I think, a similar viewpoint where it's like our school system was really designed to kick out identical factory workers, right?
That's exactly what it was kicked out.
All of them were you were supposed to have this regimented education so that when you were spit out, you could go right into that job and be adequate.
That's it.
Right?
That's it.
But let's be very clear, though, and I'm going to jump in here. The reality is not only did the path of education and institutional public education from an investment to a return on investment begin to illustrate the lack of marketplace upward mobility in certain classes that you were already established in. You had a certain amount of legal artistry also being devised in the 70s, 80s, gearing up for protecting intellectual property rights for the people that had all the intellect.
Right. Well, this is the thing, though. So that I'm going to push back on you. Perceived intellect. We got to put perceived in there, because if you don't allow me to come to the party, you don't know that I have the best punch.
There's no doubt.
That's, so those laws, even when those laws were written, it was written excluding certain people because we had already determined that, I'll give you a prime example. There are some great successful people that I've met here that went through Chattanooga's Kirkman High School, which was a technologically based, trade school, basically. And there's some great people that have had wonderful job-based careers out of the trades that they learned there. There's nothing wrong with that. All right. That's great. But at what point did you make up a decision or take a poll and said to the population of kids that were zoned for that school, that's where you go to school, hey, who wants to be a lawyer? Because if you want to be a lawyer, Kirkman ain't where you go. But that's where I'm zoned to go. So you really don't know what my intellect is in terms of law and policy. All you know is what I can do with my hands. And what you will find is I know some great lawyers that are wonderful electricians, that are wonderful brick masons, but they will kick your tail in a courtroom. But I never get allowed the opportunity to go foster that intelligence and grow it. And, to use some of our gig language, incubate in a law setting. I'm incubated in a trade setting. And so you think my intellect is one-dimensional, and I really have multifacets.
Yeah, they get pushed into the track.
Correct.
And the track doesn't let them come back off.
And so there was all these legal cases about tracking kids. And so now, quote unquote, we can't track kids anymore, right? But people are still tracking kids, right? So we say, we've integrated our schools, but I'll say Chattanooga school, the city and the county merged the year I graduated from high school. I graduated in 1997. That's still unreal to me that those two districts or those two school districts didn't merge until the year I graduated from high school, and I'm not that freaking out.
I graduated in '88 and came here to play basketball, and that's all I was focused on is sports. The running joke in my family is, you're a former athlete, because I'm always like, I'm an athlete. And they're like, you're 300 plus pounds. You're a former athlete. But the reality is, I remember how controversial that was when they...
Yes.
And I didn't really understand why they did that. Can you kind of break it down for me? Why is it just about saving money? Is it just about creating central?
It's money. But this is the thing. So let's talk about it from a business standpoint, Michelle. If Michelle Peterson Corporations merged with Lakweshia Ewing's corporation, and it truly was a merger, we would have a third name, wouldn't we?
One would think that I would basically
if it was
say,
a true
hey,
merger.
That's right.
But Hamilton County Schools merged with Chattanooga City Schools and became Hamilton County Schools. That wasn't a merger. That's a takeover.
Yeah.
But what was the benefit to Hamilton County?
The benefit, because there's so much money attached with poverty. There's so much money attached with federal money, grants and things. So you want to help. Most of these need-based programs or grants, federally or state, basically are saying, if you have a great need due to socioeconomic status or kids who've had lack of opportunity to actually access services, then you become the most vulnerable and you need XYZ services. Well, what was happening is that same level of poverty, and I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off here, that same level of poverty, if not greater in some areas, exists in the rural areas as well. But this is the difference. So you have different sets of family values that have been fostered for generations. And so people don't fill out those free lunch. That's why free lunch is such a big deal. It's such a big number that they use. People didn't fill out the free lunch applications because in some of those parts of the community, you had family pride and you didn't take handouts. And, we may live on a farm and, and be poor according to governmental standards, but we didn't really see ourselves that way. And so they didn't fill out the applications. So then they didn't get the dollars because the documented poverty didn't exist in those areas. But if you ever have gone to Massagill Holler, but you ever gone to Massagill Holler, you ever gone up, going up to Birchwood, there's
you don't have to go there from where I'm from, Lakweshia, which is Johnson City, Tennessee. It's ironic that you're at the I have a hard time with furthest and farthest. You're at the farthest end of the state, which is Memphis, and I'm at the farthest end of the other side of the state, and we're meeting on this podcast. And I can tell you that my grandmother, who I had two grandmothers, I always say this, one said Jesus all the time and talked about God and all the things that you do in Him and trust in Him and all the things that go along that, took me to Tammy Faye Baker's PTL over in Charlotte, outside of Charlotte. Then I had another grandmother that was basically agnostic, believed in Mother Nature, kindness, treat others as you want to be treated, but thought human beings were the devil incarnate, and she had moved to dogs, said the F word all the time and drank beer. When I went to that F word drinking beer, she lived in a holler. Her address when I was at college at UTC, my friends would always make fun of me, was called Bear Waller Holler. And I would write that address down, and my friends, because we wrote letters to one another, because that was predating email. And she had such wonderful, she was just a storyteller, and she would write me letters about all kinds of things happening in the holler, and it was all white people. It was all industrialized from the railroads. I mean, the Irwin, Tennessee area. Betty Kincaid is her name. I'll promote this in Irwin to see if anybody there knows my family. My mother is Emily Kincaid. People seem to know the Kincaids in Irwin, but keep in mind, Irwin was known as the most racist town in East Tennessee. There was not a black person. So whenever I bought my black basketball teammates there, they would be like, we are not going to Irwin, Tennessee. And I'd be like, it's just not as bad as people think it is. My family is there.
You live in your own little circle.
You live here in your own little circle. And then they would come over there and we'd go downtown to the movies and people would be nice to them. But there would still be this systematic fear that they're going to come here if we are nice to them. And I think that's what's been illustrated in education. If you can isolate people in certain ways and then label them free lunch, then it's just exactly what Jane Austen said, is pride a fault or a virtue? Because the person actually needs the lunch.
Correct.
The child needs to be fed.
The breakfast. And so education, is driven a lot. I would argue that you couldn't go to any data set on public education and not see a system wherever in this country that they haven't collected that free and reduced lunch number, because it's become a label. It's become a stamp of approved poverty, right? So you met the cut, your school. So Title I, let's talk about Title I, which is federal money. Title I dollars are basically allocated based on that number. You get Title I dollars based on the number of students you have that qualify for free and reduced lunch. And so you'll see from year to year here in Chattanooga, which is something to be said for the marketplace, we have a lot of people that are in generational poverty. And then you have those that are in situational poverty. Those are two different things. So my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother all lived, in a impoverished situation. They got vouchers, they got food stamps, all that kind of stuff. That's generational poverty. You go back 2-3 generations. That's kind of what the family has been propped up against to succeed. Then you have these people where your jobs have closed down. So these foundry workers. You have people that, post.
Yeah, because this neighborhood decade, was right. Buster Brown.
Right. So Buster Brown shuts down. We have layoffs. So we can even bring it currently. We have layoffs at Amazon or at Volkswagen or whatever for seasonal reasons. Now you have people who had good jobs, had, pretty decent paying jobs. I'm going to say good jobs, but decent paying jobs, making a livable wage. Now they're 3 months behind on their mortgage. They're trying to figure out, how do I feed my kids? They're trying to figure out, how do I keep this middle class life that I've created? They're in situational poverty. Their poverty came not as a result of 3-4 generations, and the mindset is completely different from those who are in generational poverty and those that are in situational poverty. And we have to acknowledge that those two things exist.
But there's generational poverty. I mean, I've touted this guy. I'm halfway through his book. J.D. Vance has just written a Hillbilly Elegy, which is a sad poem about comparing Appalachian people and the institutional coal mines and things like that fed the energy and made all the steel for all these towns to grow on. They had all these coal miners working these coal mines, and that's all they knew. And their children didn't know anymore, except basically you go to school, which was treated almost as a job, and whether they got something out of it or not, or they saw opportunity there, was whether or not someone there had a dream for them. Because I think that's so relevant. It's why, I'm not as big a Martin Luther King person as probably I should be, because I love Whitney Young. And it makes me kind of, I get really kind of teary-eyed about this, and I promise I won't cry very often, but Whitney Young recognized the power of negotiation, the power of going into these institutions and saying to them, these corporations, these arms of government investment from war, and saying to them, use what you have and let these laborers around your factories come in and be part of the process. And then what they lost sight of, that had been great if Whitney Young would have stayed around, because he could have flown to Japan in the 80s, and he could have had a conversation with the Japanese on how Toyota and how Nissan and how these factories were beating the Americans at their game. And all they did was beat the Americans at their own bigotry, because they ran a program, an institutional or an industrial engineering term called Kaizen, which really just means get off your butt and go down to the factory floor and talk to the guy or the gal screwing in that widget that you've got as part of that Ford process, and ask them, how do you make this better? I do Kaizen every day, because I call the people or email the people or text the people, what can I do for you today that makes your job easier, makes your job and your life better from the marketplace that I'm creating from you? But I can assure you that when and if someone ever figures out a way to manufacture home elevators at the rate that I'm selling them, and they can decrease that price where I don't have the negotiation power, because it's like James Chapman said, the first, frankly speaking, buddy, what difference does it make if the NCAA Division I superstar has an attorney at the signing table and he tells him this is what, or she tells him this is what you're signing away today, because they're just going to go find somebody else that can run a 440 in 20 seconds.
Right. So this is a question, right? So using your analogy about going down in, what is it, Kaizen? Kaizen. You know, taking that process. If in fact, you know, the system that I built is working for me, okay, whoever me is, you know, the system itself is the me, I guess. You know, if it's working for me, if I really use that strategy and went and asked people, how can I make this better? I would then be breaking my own system. This is what I tell people. There's a lot of places that, you know, I call it poverty pimping, all right? If, in fact, I help the people that I'm supposed to help, I've worked myself out of a job. Yeah. I'm not going to name any nonprofit, but there's tons that my mission is to empower, to improve, to increase, blah, for the betterment of set populations, whatever the population is that they're serving. If, in fact, I do that, because if I come and ask you, Andy, what do you need? And Andy says, I need clean water, quality education, and a job making over $35,000, because here locally in Chattanooga, I think it's $35,000 is what they call a livable wage, and our teachers only make $31,000. So I don't even know how teachers live here.
My sister's a teacher, and she lives at my parents' house.
Correct. So
she can't afford a mortgage.
But if I told you, my sister lives with me. She works for the school system. But if I told you what I needed from you, and literally you hand me those things, what are you going to do now? Yeah, so I think this is what I tell people. This is my little sick experiment in my head. I think people create I call them Calvary moments, where you actually came around. Andy has a can of soda that y'all can't see here, or seltzer water. So I come around, I knock your can of seltzer water over, and then I run and get a towel, and I come from the other side of the table with the towel saying, hey, Andy, let me help you. But the reality is I'm the one who knocked it over.
That's old war techniques. That's what's happened. Yeah, hey, I'm not even going to go in this discussion, because you're going to have to come. We've already figured out that this is a good dynamic, but you're going to have to come where we talk about what's happening in the buy-owner marketplace when it comes to vacation rentals. Because what those guys are doing is they're creating the sickness and selling the cure.
Yes, it.
I mean, yeah, it's the oldest trick in the book.
It's the oldest trick in the book. And they spoon feeding the cure to them. I got this, and I'm helping you. That's so sycophantic that I don't even begin to understand how anybody can't read David Copperfield and Dickens and not understand that what you get out of that is Uriah Heep is kissing Master Copperfield's ass to get something out of him, and it may be sinister, and that's how this started. Call it a crusade, call it whatever you want. I've put a lot of money behind this. I've bought a building on Glass Street with the hopes that other people will come to us for another podcast. I'm going to find, hopefully, a local platform. I've approached several people and said, you're missing out. There's this disconnect with these kids, with these young people. I call them kids, and they're not. With these young people that are going out and putting their voices in this marketplace, like Matt at Camp House, or some other people that you probably know as well. And there needs to be a local forum base for that gives people a menu within a platform that has older listeners as well. Because I promise you right now, there might not be somebody out there that's 60 that understands where we're coming from. But if there was an 80-year-old where we are, because they experienced what Winston Churchill said, which is the right gives the ladder, the left gives the tools. And right now, the ladder is broken and the tools are rusted. And it's become an institutional mindset. And when you do that, it stagnates people on fear.
Right.
Because if I don't take this, then I may never get it again. And that's what I have every day in business. If I have to make a decision sometimes, and I've been very honest, that the most amount of money I've made in my life is by saying no. Because I have recognized that that's not a good decision for me or my family. And I told somebody this at the Female Factor, or I said it out loud, and 3 women, because I think women are inherently built to say yes, right. Because we're mothers, we're nurturers. It's not that fathers aren't meant to say or not say, but the reality is my dad was a worker. I always say if I were to write a book about my parents, it's when a hillbilly married an Appalachian. Because my mother is the strategist and the one that worked for Social Security. She's still at Social Security. I am begging her to retire, and she will not, because you know why? She says, who are they going to come up to, Michelle, those young people working there, and ask, how do I do this, Emily? And it's my service to my country to stay there so that those young people don't get confused.
Wow.
And I'm begging her. I offer her $10,000 the other day, please. And she was just like, I'm just not ready yet. And I just think it's just one of these things that it looks bad on me to be buying my mother to retire, but it's because I'm worried she's still getting up at 6 a.m. She's still going there till 5 p.m. And it was meant to be a situation where her investment and their pride and all their getting up every morning. But what I do know, Lakweshia, this is what I can assure you. If either one of my parents had been sick, I'd have been on free lunch. There's no doubt in my mind. We were, as my dad said, 2 months from homeless.
Yep.
You know, and it's, so on that note too, working's not a bad thing for, see it a lot when people retire, like they have nothing to do, then all the downward spiral of health goes. So yeah, there's a good reason. If she wants to keep working, but, and then to kind of circle back, I think it was a lot of what the conversation I heard too, if we go back to the idea of card playing at the start, you got to know when to hold and when you lay your cards down. But that's really circling back to Archway. Like the problem here is some people never even get cards. Like they're not even given.
They don't even
the
know
people
that
who have the cards.
Yeah,
aren't giving them out to everyone. And whether we call that the education system or anything else, or they're certainly selectively giving them out. Maybe the white males get cards, but the people giving them the cards are still giving them a set card that they know.
Well,
right?
It's like this though. It's like the game is spades. And as a minority in this country, I'm getting Uno cards.
Yeah.
And I got a handful of Uno cards.
Yeah.
I will never win the spade game with a handful of Uno cards. I got the wrong freaking cards. And you're making me feel like I have a handful of cards. I got a full deck.
I'm playing.
This ain't even the game. I'm playing, and I'm playing hard.
Yeah.
And the rules changed. And the cards I have no longer make me a winner because the game changed. Yeah. So come over here with your spade. Let's flip the table a little bit. You keep the cards you got, but we're going to play Uno now.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what we've
and
talked
see what
about
it feels like
on the podcast before, and Michelle, you brought up where it's, we become the education system for these kids in East Chattanooga and beyond that people aren't watching, I forget your exact phrase, right? But someone who they've already kind of forgotten about and aren't watching has the most potential because...
I always tell people, here's the thing I tell people, and I think Lakweshia's got this too, and I love the fact that we met at Main Street Innovations Female Factor. I'm hoping there's going to be a female factor too, maybe with less guests. I was a little critical. I enjoy Franklin McCauley and obviously everything that goes about him, but I was a little critical at the end of that why did we have a 70-year-old man in front of the female factor? And I say that publicly, as no disrespect to Main Street Innovations or to Franklin McCauley. I say it because that's what those people think still that we need to do. We need to give homage to the past to talk about the future. And I want it known today that my homage to the past is the fact that I'm a taxpayer, I'm a citizen, I'm trying to do better. I'm trying, when Yolanda Putman said, you're going to come over here and stand up for people, I said, no, Yolanda, I'm going to come over here and show people how to stand up for themselves. Because that's the assist when you're the type of basketball player that I was. And shout out to Leah Jackson if she ever listens to my podcast. She played at Carson Newman. I'll promote this at Carson Newman. Maybe somebody knows there. But when I was a hilltopper in Johnson City, Tennessee, and I was all sports, I could have cared less how not to end a sentence in a preposition. I mean, I was going to go and either get somebody to tell me the answers and why that can happen later, because I just needed to get a 2.0 to keep playing basketball. And the reality is I was the best assist maker in that crew because the fact of the matter is they were more talented than me, and I could set them up knowing full well that they're going to point at me going down the court, because through that recognition that's all I needed to know was that we were treating each other with kindness and respect and consideration. And I bring that back around to the fact that we have lost the ability to give individual teachers the approach, the ability to recognize in kids, because we're so afraid that it'll become so unsterile that something awful will happen. Because maybe something awful did happen in schools in 1970, but we're not living in 1970. Kids have cameras. They can be the police of themselves.
Correct.
They have video things. We've been recorded right now by somebody to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And so I'm going to get ahead of it and record myself and throw it out there. Just like I told you my first podcast, I said the N-word. And why I did that publicly is because I had said that. And when I watched that sideshow pony show with Paula Dean and how scripts that was a contractual dispute that they used that for. You know, the reality of the situation is you can't base someone's integrity or character based on one thing they did.
Right.
But what you can do is give people a network of intellectual property within other people's property so that it can begin to expand organically. And without having to say, these kids need to basically make this score on this test that wasn't designed by you so that everybody has a common core. And I don't know that much about common core, but what I do know...
At the core, we aren't that common.
That's right.
Yeah. That's my little soundbite on that.
Because here's the deal. How do you have harmony without different voices?
Right. Well, and the thing about this too is, schools are about control, and I'm not anti-school, but schooling isn't education. I tell people that every day. Schooling is not education. I probably was one of the best schooled individuals. I went through school. I've gotten 4 degrees beyond high school. All right. I did schooling well because I learned how to school.
Let me jump in here.
I did not jump in education.
I'm the worst. I'm the best unschooled person because I have such horrible authority issues. When somebody was sitting there telling me something at UTC, I was like, that doesn't sound right. And I didn't take their test. That's why I never applied for graduation at UTC, because my GPA there, when they go to look it up, is 1.9.
Well, this is the thing, though. You get, so when you're getting, I was one of the best schooled because I mastered the game of school. I knew how to go through school. I knew how to succeed at school. Because I was getting educated outside of school. See, if you're not getting educated outside of school, then you become just an individual on the conveyor belt of of public education or schooling. So I remember going to my college. It was my sophomore history class. The first history class you take, it's like from 1800 to 1920 or something like that. And the guy gives us the syllabus, and he tells us we're going to have 4 tests and a final and 1 paper. Like, that's pretty much your outline, right? And he didn't have an attendance policy. So I made it up in my mind I was only coming to his class on test day.
Yeah.
So second test day, he pulls me to my maiden name is Tibbs. He pulls me to the side. Dr. Hughes, I remember Dr. Alvin Hughes at Austin P. He pulls me to the side and he says, "Miss Tibbs, so you're just not gonna come to class, huh?" I said, "Sir, well, you show up for tests," and the tests were all essay. All his tests, so you had to write like 2 blue books, right? So I said, "Well, I don't really understand why I have to come, Dr. Hughes." And he said, "What do you mean you don't understand why you have to come?" I said, "Well, it's history from 1800 to 1920. If you can tell me something firsthand that I can't read in a book that happened from 1800 to 1920, then I'll come to class. You weren't here. You're reading the book. So you know what? I'm going to read the book, and I'll come on test day."
Yeah, but here's the funny thing is
but that's not how you do school.
Amazing that we're sitting here and you're talking about exactly what Jeffrey Canada talked about in his Harlem Project, which is that in this country we teach kids how to read up till 3rd grade, and past 3rd grade we expect them to read to learn.
Yeah. So
and I couldn't read.
So from pre-kindergarten to 2nd grade, you're teaching them you're teaching them to learn to read. Okay, to
That's
learn
right.
to read. So you're teaching them phonetics, you're teaching them syllabus and
what does phonetics mean? Just
sounds.
Like
yeah.
what the fact that I can't pronounce your name properly.
Correct. There's something phonetically.
Would you give us your degree so that I can know what degrees you have?
Sure. So I have a associate's in applied science. I have a bachelor's in psychology, a master's in educational administration, and I'm finishing right now defending my doctoral degree with emphasis on organizational leadership.
So would you be offended if next time we're together I refer to you as Dr. Tibbs?
I wouldn't. You can call me Dr. Ewing. I'm married
Dr.
now.
Ewing.
Yeah,
you're married now. I like
get
Tibbs
my husband
better
his
though.
credit. Got to give
Tibbs
my
just
husband.
feels so good to me, man. I just Dr. Tibbs.
Got to give my husband his credit.
We're gonna go Dr. Ewing.
Yeah, but that's it. You know so K2. You're learning those things, but in 3rd grade, now we want to know what you learned from what you're reading. So you go from learning to read to reading to learn. It's all about comprehension.
Yeah, I said that wrong. That's what
comprehension
he said.
and regurgitation.
And that's the thing. So they call it retail, right? So tell me what you just read. And there is nothing better for me. I used to love this in the schools when we would go in and observe. There's nothing better for me than the kid who tells a story when they in their retail that was nothing to do with the story they read.
Yeah.
I love that kid. That kid has a phenomenal imagination. That kid, and they're using all of the context clues of their community. None of that was in the story. They failed the test. But to me, that kid should have passed because he just wrote a whole story in his mind that had nothing to do with what he just read. But that's not retail, so he fails.
Massive problem right now that we're seeing. Everyone's complaining job market of like, I get out of college with my degree and I can't get a job. And the problem here is employers have figured it out. Like when everyone comes out of the school, this cattle trough or cattle line of education, that they're all the same. And none of them have any creative thinking skills or ability
Correct.
to
critical
problem
thinking
solve. Problem solve, right?
So
they're the ones getting the jobs.
Correct.
And you're not learning that in
and
school.
critical thinking is the most important thing that you can
But
come
this is the
out
thing,
of.
though. So I'm going to go, I'm going to pull on my preacher hat here for a minute, my evangelist hat.
Come on
here,
with it.
all right. So
Come
this
on
is the
with
thing.
it.
Listen, though. No, listen. So let's talk about deployment and employment, right? So everything that was created under the sun deploys itself, except for us as human beings. It deploys. So a seed deploys itself once it's placed in the soil, and it deploys and it becomes a tree. Fish, they go out, they grow up from the larva, and they go out and they become fish that swim. The fish didn't go to swim school. It's what's inside of it is manifested. Birds didn't go to flight school to learn to fly. It's who they are. So what happens is, as humans, we don't deploy ourselves because we don't understand who we are and what we're created to be. That goes into purpose. Have no idea who you're supposed to be. That's why you can't say no. That's why you say yes. And so because you don't know where to deploy yourself, then it becomes easy to get employed by somebody else.
Yeah, or it gets pushed out of you. Like you might have that creative, and we've seen it, kid that, I told an interesting story. I don't think it was on a podcast yet, but so I was a long-term sub in high schools for about a year. That was all I could make it in computer applications. And I swear it was maybe first week on the job, public school up in Illinois. And we had this brand new software system where I could monitor all the kids and their screens and what they were doing and lock them out of things when it was time to work on this. 1 week in, and I start to notice that one of the screens doesn't match up with what I'm seeing on the kid's screen when I actually look out at the classroom. I was like, that's kind of weird. I'm watching and looking and watching. Finally, I get up, and all of a sudden, I see his screen flash back. I'm like, I'm going to go sit back down. And I start watching and realize that his screen on my computer was simply looping, right? The same movements. Wow. And so in 1 week, this kid had figured out how to record a loop of traction that he knew wouldn't flag my attention, send it to my computer in this unhackable system, while meanwhile he'd gotten out of it. He was on the web doing whatever he wanted. 1 week. And the kid ended up with a 20-ish% in the semester in the class, right? And I can tell you right now, he is way smarter than I've ever been in computer applications and probably is making millions of dollars right now working for a gaming company or something. But it's like right there, like we tell that kid he's wrong and it failed. Like, what does he care? He doesn't even, not going to work, for that because he has his own creative ideas and we were trying to push that out of them. I don't like it.
Wow. Yeah, I have to say that it's been an interesting, we've already made it almost an hour. Like, that's how quick this movement over here at Archway and, Dr. Ewing, which is a lot easier for me to get out so respectfully.
That works.
I cannot tell you, and the governor really missed out today because he would have really thoroughly enjoyed. This moved quick today, y'all. Is it going to move that quick if you come back? Will you come back next Wednesday?
Most certainly.
Yeah, we can talk education for a long term. I got a lot of thoughts.
The fact of the matter is that for me, I am not going to leave this. Somebody will have to take me out to get me to stop talking about the exploitation of ignorant kids when you look at the NCAA and all the institutions that tether themselves to that organization of fraud that basically takes people's sweat equity. Because I've said this 1,000 times, I'll say it again today. The equalizer was supposed to be education. Right. It was supposed to be where you couldn't define people by their class if you taught them a certain way of speaking. And the reality is that through our own language arts and all the things that we know about people is the quickest way. Even Oprah said this. The quickest way for her to sum people up when she would speak to them, and Barbara Walters said this too, two really, really impressive females that came out of organizations of thought that both were like, anomalies because they didn't exist before, have said that when someone says, how did you all meet? And that other person answers, her and I went to high school together. They immediately sum them up by how their parents answered. Mm-hmm. And they didn't get corrected in the 24 years that they went to school. They didn't pick up on that. For them is their equalizer when it comes to what class they're always going to be. Unless they pair up because they happen to be the plastic people walking around these days that get people to write for them so that it makes them sound intelligent. And it makes them look like they're really great people or really educated people when in fact they're probably just really great people that don't know not to end a sentence in a preposition, but because somebody's paired them up with somebody that knows how to write and they can regurgitate.
And now we're back to politics.
Well, yeah, because that's really what occurs in the terms of, I mean, shout out to Melody Shikari. I'm a big fan of hers just for attempting this. I don't think she has a clue what she's doing. And I've talked to her and said, do you know what you're going to do? And she's like, no, I'm just running a race like anybody else. And I think it's so funny if people judge her for that, because does anybody stop a horse at the Kentucky Derby and say, hey, what are you doing today? Or the jockey, you're in the process. She's trying to figure it out. But the one thing that I told her that would get her 10,000 votes is I said, here's all you need to tell people is in this country right now, we're over licensing people and under regulating product. And that's never a good mix, because the people who own the marketplace are going to exploit that every day, which is what's happening. You know, and so when you look at things that are happening in the insurance and the banking world, and you look at all these artificial constructs that have been created to mitigate our risks, to protect us from one another, all they're doing is taking the fear that people have for and the love that they have for their families, and saying to a Hamilton County, how much money do you think teachers put in to that system in the form of insurance? Do you have any idea?
I would say, from their personal check, I mean, they say healthcare is about $10K over there. I mean, Hamilton County has the best benefit package from pretty much any employer in this city.
But let
me change that. They used to
gather every year in the form of premiums at that institution. Like, this is the question that pays. Yeah, because if you're a teacher there, do you know what someone's doing with that float? Because if you're 23, it's been proven time and time again, you probably won't need access. That's just a negotiation tactic for your copay. Because that's probably what you're going to use as a teacher in Hamilton County is the copay. Unless you've had something really awful happen to you. Right. Statistics show you won't need your health care. Most people in this country don't use their health care, because I know someone who's a hospice nurse and a hospice doctor and a hospice fundraiser. I know 3 or 4 women over there at hospice. And one of the statistics show that you use the most amount of health care the last 6 months of your life. So you've been paying into this system, this artificial construct, and I'm not advocating that people stop paying insurance, but what I am advocating is teachers at Hamilton County ask people, where's that money being invested? Yeah. And who's it going to? Because I think the reality is that how many fees and other things that you pay need to be transparent, because it's a pond of money that is considered a float. Warren Buffett wrote about it in 2009. I posted it on my Frankly Speaking page, and no one ever talked about it because they didn't understand that what he was talking about was that he could get people and he could select businesses that are gathering all this money from conscientious employees, and he could go spread that seed anywhere he wants in business, because he didn't have to pay those premiums till 20 years later, because he had risk managers
on it and then go back and pay back.
He made millions. He made billions on it because he was trustworthy enough for these organizations to give him their money to go invest. And how many times do you think that happens where they invest against the actual benefit of the teachers in those schools? Because wouldn't it help?
That's a whole nother show. Ooh.
Well, that's the end of the Archway today. Shows, yeah. Frankly Speaking podcast. We're over here at Archway. Tonight is the first exercise we do with the kids. We've got 5 kids, Dr. Ewing, that are on our Archway team right now. They're branding a donut. I don't know if you saw my Barbara Davis video talking about Barbara Davis, let's give her a shout out at Cox Bakery on Broad Street, because she's the maker for me for the kids. So the kids don't have to learn to make donuts. I can private label a donut they design.
Yeah, and please, if you're listening to this, head over to our YouTube channel, watch the video on Barbara and Cox Bakery, or it's on Vimeo as well.
Does anybody know the difference between YouTube and Vimeo?
Lots, yeah.
One's European and one's American, right? One's owned by Google and one's owned by Vimeo owned by
I'm sure a major
Swedish something. It'd be interesting to have a conversation, but it's Wednesday. Everybody have a great day. We need to go live with one of these shows. Maybe we'll invite Leslie Greenfield over, and we'll let her do one of her Facebook Lives. Maybe next Wednesday she'll do that. I keep talking to the Free Press people about the fact that they have such a platform of viewership that if they start talking to young people, who knows what ideas might come out of that conversation. And Leslie is going out and talking to people within the community and doing Facebook Live. And maybe you got Tanisha Irvin will join us, not assuming that all black people know other black people.
You know I was going to get you on that one. I was like, and I love Tanisha Irvin, but I'm like, really?
I don't know,
I know
Tanisha.
other people.
I met her that day, and that's what we're here for at Archways, to bring us together so that we can talk about things that don't seem so sterile. And sometimes I may mess up and Annie may mess up. The governor, he's probably pretty good about not messing up because he's been
Government.
the governor. He's been in military and now the fire department for how long? 18 years? You know that he has learned to stay in his box. Even the fact that he shows up over here is amazing.
I haven't got there yet.
I don't think Dr. Ewing knows, but our friend Carlos Hampton, Dr. Ewing, he was the first battalion chief in the fire department to have access to his job through a test.
Yeah.
He passed that test and got his job through other things. And I asked him during one of our podcasts, how did it used to be? And he said it used to be where the top chose. And he was the first
put in your time, right?
Put in your time, and then if the block comes open, you got to have the right guy politicking for you, and they'll put you in the block. But he took the test, which gave him the opportunity to go up in the block, which that's why it's so ironic. We're talking about testing children as I think is a negative thing because it dissuades kids from thinking outside the box, but then you have government that is able to give a guy like Carlos Hampton the avenue to move up through a test.
Well, if testing brings opportunity, then it's okay. But if testing means further categorization and oppression, then no, testing sucks.
I think we live on that note.